Clint Eastwood is in such a secure position now and knows exactly who he is, that he can joke about the early disastrous days in the beginning of his film career when he was a contractee with Universal Studios. He made a lot of bad films, films like Revenge of the Creature and Tarantula, but one of the high points in making what he now calls the Dogs and Disasters was one called Ambush at Cimarron Pass, and Clint Eastwood in New Orleans talks about that early film.
Well, in those days, it was, in those days I was, you know, a contract player, and it wasn't a question of magazines. I wasn't even put in pictures too much at Universal. I just did a lot of bits, and then Ambush at Cimarron Pass came much later. And that was prior to Rawhide. That was almost the picture that made me decide to quit. At that time I was thinking that maybe I should give up the business and go into something else. And my wife, I'll have to give her a lot of credit. She kind of talked me into hanging in there, and then about 6 months after that I got Rawhide, which kept me fully employed for the next 7.5 years. 8 years on the air it ran. And so I kind of, I was kind of grateful to her there, but I was, what I meant by never being a darling of the press is I would never, the build-up, having the old-fashioned studio build-up in the old days is, as you know, they used to have, big press departments, and when they did a picture, they'd give you big ballyhoos and send you out on tours and do all kinds of things. My first films outside of Rawhide, when Rawhide came on, there was about 30 some odd westerns on the air, and so you know, another western. One critic came out and said, "Just what we need is another western," you know, and he was right. You know, there was an awful lot of them. Then when I left that and I went into films and started making films. I made the first 3 in Europe. And they weren't, you know, the first one, A Fistful of Dollars, wasn't intended to be much of a picture. It was intended to be sold maybe on the Italian market, and if they could sell it to Japan and a few other markets, fine. If they sold it to Canada or the United States, something that was sensational. But what happened is it took off to a much larger degree than they thought, and so they distributed it around the world, and the ensuing 2 Italian-made films also they distributed around the world. But then there was never any campaign as far as I was concerned. In fact, I had to do those 3 films before I even started getting any offers from American producers, because I was still considered a television actor, you know, kind of class-conscious group.
You know, you say something like there wasn't much expected out of A Fistful of Dollars, and there's this whole pattern of self-deprecation by Clint Eastwood on Clint Eastwood. I mean, one never hears you talking about the fact that when you read that script and when you gave it to your wife Maggie, you were the one who did the comparative study on Kurosawa and Yojimbo and the Seven Samurai. You're the guy who plays Bach. You're the guy who, in the middle of defining somebody else's work and comparing your own, can say, you can't have a cartoon in the middle of a Renoir. Mm-hmm. And yet, at the same time, this never comes out. Are you hesitant to push forward the Clint Eastwood that reads and intellectualizes and plays Bach?
I'm hesitant only in the sense that I hate to, you know, because it's not really acting per se. You know, you're getting into a lot of other things, and you're talking about films in general, filmmaking in general, but acting is really not an intellectual art. It's an emotional art, and people who intellectualize it usually talk their way out of a lot of very good things that might come out of their instincts. And I work from an inside level on the script, reading the script, as you say, and deciding whether to do it and whether A Fistful of Dollars might become something that was unique. That may be a combination of many things. It may be a combination of luck, skill, or some sort of psychic thing that it might capture the imagination of the public. I don't really know. I just know that it appealed to me at the moment, and I thought it might have a chance to appeal to the public. However, it was made for a limited budget, $20,000, which is considered low. And the Italian producers of the show, not the director, Sergio Leone, but the producers, would have been very satisfied if the picture had made $300,000.
But when you
their sights weren't high. In other words, they weren't anticipating sensational kind of international gross on the thing. They just kind of thought, well, I'll make a pretty good little film, and this guy's been exposed on television in the United States, Western Hemisphere, and maybe that'll help us get a few more bucks for the most part. You know, if we can do a little better than break even, we'll be happy.
You simplify your philosophy and approach to acting and directing, and yes, you say it's emotional and it's instinctive, it's intuitive, and that you don't stay awake nights pondering the intellectuality of what you're doing. But then when you come up against people that you've worked with, like Julie Harris, Geraldine Page, Elizabeth Hartman, Jessica Walters, people who really are either New York studio oriented or tremendously internal performing artists, are you working on the same wavelength with a Geraldine Page or a Julie Harris?
Sure, because they're all working the same way. They're all working on a very instinctive level. They're highly trained actresses, all of them extremely good. That was one fortunate thing about working on Ride, was that I got to work with people like the Julie Harrises, that they could afford to bring in those kind of guest stars, and it made a great training ground, because I did 250 hours of that show with very fine people coming in and being your support every week. But I think all acting is on the same wavelength. There's just many ways of teaching oneself to act, and there are many actors that approach things differently. Some actors will approach things by thinking out every little process, and others will just let it come out of the gut level type thing.
You were refused that $25 raise back in the good old days at Universal. You made those 13 or 14 great films, beginning with Revenge of the Creature.
Yeah, they were great.
And listen, they're probably classics now. But
they probably will. They'll come in. Yeah.
Was Lou Wasserman the president of MCA then?
No, it was Universal was called Universal International, and it was I think a guy I think Edward Mull was the president then. I don't MCA, after I was thrown out of there, some year and a half after I started there. I guess about a year after that, I guess MCA bought the company, and they bought the lot and the whole deal, and it's been a totally different organization since then.
What did it mean to you to go back 11 years later and work out a $1 million deal with Universal on Coogan's Bluff and a percentage arrangement?
Well, actually, people talk about these $1 million deals and trades, and they all sound very good. I've worked mostly on a percentage arrangement all along, and I've had pretty good luck with it.
But didn't you get $1 million for Kelly's Heroes?
No.
You didn't?
No. And but I've worked on a percentage of the films, and the percentage can be good depending if the film does good, and if the film doesn't do good, then you've taken your chances like everybody else. It's like kind of like playing in Reno or Las Vegas or something. But these kind of the deal's only the percentage of what the deal's only as good as what the film does. I'd rather have a small percent of a good success than a large percent of a flop.
Tell me what happened that day you pulled up to the Paramount lot to begin work on Paint Your Wagon, and the guard wouldn't let you in, said you looked suspicious.
Yeah, well,
you went home and said, what the hell, I'm getting paid anyway.
Well, I went to, I had an office over at Universal, where I still do today, but I went to start Paint Your Wagon. I drive a pickup truck, which is, I guess the guard was from the old school and thought I should come in some sort of limousine or something. And I was dressed kind of like a bum, you know. I was just going. It was just a rehearsal when we were going in. We were just going into a stage like the one we're on now, and everybody was going to sit around and talk out the parts. So I came in the pickup, and the guy said, "Well, we don't have your name here." And I said, "Well, you know, but I'm supposed to be on stage 21 in 5 minutes, and you know, they're expecting me. I know." He said, "Well, we don't have your name here." So I said, "Well, okay, if you don't have my name here, fine." So I turned around the truck, and I went back to my office, and I sat there, and pretty soon, about a half hour later, the phone was ringing, and they were calling up, and Alan J. Lerner was calling, "Where are you, where are you?" And I said, you know, I don't know, if I'm out here at Universal, they let me on the lot, but down there at Paramount, they won't let me on. I don't know what the problem is. So he said, oh, it's been a great mistake. I said, well, don't sweat it. I'll be in a while.
They didn't dock you for the day, did they?
No.
No. Tell me something about
Clint. Dock the guard.
Thunderbolt and Lightfoot is Clint Eastwood's 26th feature film, and your 27th will be The Eiger Sanction, which you're going to direct in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
But in talking about a man with 26 feature films behind him and his 27th ready to go as a director.
As far as the male-oriented cinema, I don't think that's true in a way. I mean, I think that no more than any other industry, and actually there's a larger population of men in the business than there are women. There have been periods in history, in the motion picture history, where there have been vast amounts of women's roles, but they seem to be going through a period right now where they're not very prevalent.
You have never.
But even when I've made films that had predominant women roles, like for instance, Play Misty for me was the best role in the picture was the woman's role.
Jessica Walter.
The Beguiled, which received very favorable reviews, had 7 major parts for women. Judith Chris thought was disgusting, you know. So I mean, you can't win for losing in there. So I don't think that the theory you're presenting, that they're rebelling against the fact that there's not enough women's roles, which I happen to agree with, by the way, that there's not enough you know, major functions of women in films today, is because they're of these the type of films I do. Because even when I've done them that have had these good women's parts, they're not they never go my way, if you want to use that kind of.
Right.
I think that the thing with women in films is just kind of a fad thing. I think eventually somebody will come along. Maybe The Way We Were might help. Maybe Love Story help. Somebody will come along with some major parts for women, and then it'll equalize out. Right now, the fact that male relationship pictures are nothing new. It's not new with Redford Newman. It's not new with myself, Bridges, or whatever film you're talking about. I mean, back to Gunga Din and way on back, they were always popular, and I think they're popular because women like them too. I mean, women are very good audiences for being objective. They like a good entertainment. They like a good relationship, whether it's the relationship between 2 men or the relationship between man, woman, or whatever.
Okay, you're talking about fine actresses. No one would contest that Geraldine Page, Julie Harris from Rawhide, or Jessica Walter are fine actresses. But you have never, since A Fistful of Dollars, appeared with a female, excluding Shirley MacLaine, who is of the same magnitude as your stature within the politics of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you
yeah, I see what you mean.
You know, I mean, why doesn't Clint Eastwood have Barbra Streisand or Elizabeth Taylor? Why weren't one of those people in The Beguiled or Misty?
Well, in Play Misty, none of those people fit the role.
Also, do you feel you don't need them? Is it going to have that much of an effect on the gross if they are in it?
Maybe not, but to me, I choose a person to be in a film that my company produces by how they fit the film. I would rather have a film where everybody fits their character rather than have a name for the sake of the namesake. And if I have a part for Elizabeth Taylor was originally supposed to do Two Mules for Sister Sarah.
Really?
She brought the project to me. You know, that would be great. If I had a part, Barbra Streisand and I have talked about doing a film together. But you know, it's that big thing of finding material. How can you find really good stories? That story is everything, and without that story, there's no use putting all these peripheral components together without the center.